Well, this is the session in the DuBois series about what you do if you just got served with divorce papers. Well, if you just got served with divorce papers, you are probably in survival mode. Things are completely different. I can't think of anything scarier, especially if it came as a surprise, than all of a sudden having divorce papers served on you and having to go through the emotional upheaval of knowing that your marriage is over, that your husband is filing for divorce, your finances are never going to be the same, your parenting, your children are never going to be the same, and it's a tremendously scary and really emotional experience, and I totally get that. At the same time, you have got to find a way to really get in control of your emotions and start to make some decisions that are kind of like business decisions, and they're going to affect you for a really long time. You don't have to all decide everything at the very beginning, but how your divorce is going to proceed is sort of, the tone is set in large part by kind of how it starts. So there's different ways that people serve divorce papers on other people, and I don't know, exactly what happened in your situation, and I have to stop here and say also that I'm a family law lawyer and I've been practicing for a long time, but this is not intended to be legal advice for you. This is an educational series in which we're talking about legal issues that affect you from an educational perspective. And the way that I'm approaching this whole series is doing something called issue spotting. And like I mentioned, it's kind of how lawyers think about things, is what issues are going to be relevant in any given situation. I'm not a lawyer in 49 other states. I don't know the laws of other states. I can't tell you the laws. I certainly don't know anything about your situation. I'd love to be able to help you, but I can't. So I want to make very clear that this is not intended to be legal advice, but we're going to just kind of walk through the process and see what things you have to be sure to attend to when you're in the situation of having a divorce filed against you. And the first thing we're going to talk about is how the process was initiated. And you can tell a lot about how a divorce process is going to go by how it was started. And then there are other ways where they have a process server, or you sort of agree to accept service of process in a sort of a low-key and amicable way, which isn't always pleasant, but at least it's not as mean-spirited as choosing a day that's so meaningful in your life, or on your wedding anniversary or Mother's Day or something like that. So you've been served with divorce papers, and that means that the court process has started. And so it's pretty important, and that means that the court now has jurisdiction over you and your family, which means that if you guys have a disagreement about who's going to pay what bills, or where the children are going to stay, or who needs money and who's going to live in the house, things like that, you can, in most states, you can go to court for something called temporary orders, which is where the court makes a ruling that between the time the divorce is filed and between the time that the divorce is finalized, there's a temporary period, and that could be a matter of months, or it could be a year or more. But you need to try to figure out what's going to happen during that time period. So while you're dealing with the horrible emotional upheaval and all the scary stuff that goes on when you realize your marriage is over, you need to start figuring out, most importantly, first and foremost, are your children safe? Of course, that's number one. If you have kids, are they safe? And most times it might be emotional for them, but as long as they're safe, that's good. And the next thing you need to do is get a grip on your financial situation. And I know that sounds like something you don't really necessarily want to face, but if you have a good job and you know you can support yourself, and you know where your money is, and you know where your savings accounts are, you know your financial situation, you're in a much better position to come from a place of power in your divorce than if you're maybe a stay-at-home mom and you're not working and you don't have any resources and you don't have access to money. So the first thing you need to figure out when you've just been served with divorce papers is, number one, is as much financial information as you can gather together. You need to do it pronto. Because if your husband filed for divorce, if he's, I don't want to say a creep, but that's kind of what I mean, is if he's been a creep about it, he might have gotten a lot of the financial information out of the house already. I have clients who come in and say, he cleaned out the file cabinet. I don't have access to our tax returns. I don't have our bank account records. I'm not even sure where he banks. If that's your situation, then you've got more of an uphill battle to try to figure out what you guys have so that you can start to gather a list of your assets and your debts. Sometimes someone is filing for divorce if your husband's filing, he's gone out and run up the credit cards, bought a new car or something like that, and now you're going to try to figure out how you're going to pay for that debt. So there's any number of ways that this can happen, but really what you have to do, and I know it's really hard, is get to the file cabinet and pull out every last piece of financial information that you can find. That means, and before you even do that, we'll do that quickly, but you also want to start gathering a team of friends around you who can help you. And we have a whole session here about gathering a team of people that are going to be your divorce team who are going to support you. And I've talked about this on the other sessions, but briefly, you want to try to find people who can help you to be really strong and be the best strong person that you can be. You don't necessarily want people on your team who have a vendetta against your ex. And if he served papers on you, then you probably have a lot of people in your life who are really mad at him, and that's okay. But you want to have some people who can be sort of on your divorce team who can help you to focus on what you need to do and not, or sort of to put the revenge and the anxiety and the bitterness and all that emotional stuff a little bit to the side and really focus on how you're going to be able to protect yourself. And sometimes your dad is a good person to do that. Sometimes your uncle or your best friend. I don't know who that is for you. It's not a bad idea to get a therapist involved or someone who has a mental health background. Spiritual advisor's good. And of course, you might want to hire a lawyer to help you with this. So think about those people, and in the divorce planner that we have that comes along with this series, there's a place to put your team, who's going to be on your team and kind of why you've chosen those people. And then there's a part about your vision for your divorce. But if you just got served with papers, you need to kind of put that aside because you're in survival mode now. This is scary stuff. You've got to figure out where if he moved out, which is usually what happens, especially if you have kids. If he's moved out, maybe he's served papers against you demanding that you come to court right away, like within a matter of weeks, and respond to his allegations of why he should have 50% time with the kids, or maybe he thinks he should have full custody, or maybe he thinks you shouldn't have access to any of the bank accounts. Sometimes people file for divorce and they put an immediate freeze on all the accounts, and then you're kind of, they can't bind the banks and tell the banks what not to do, but they can tell you that you can't go take any money out. So, and I'm not trying to scare you or anything, you've got to look at the papers that you've been served with and read them very, very carefully. Sometimes when you get served divorce papers, there are restraining orders in there that say things like you can't go within 100 feet of him or his new place he's living, or there's all kinds of stuff that can come in those divorce papers. So the first thing you have to do is read them extremely carefully, and read them with somebody who's on your team, like your family member, a friend, or someone who can help you sort through this. Best of all is to get it to a lawyer as quickly as you can. But if you don't have time or you don't have any money to hire a lawyer right away, read that paperwork, understand what's in the paperwork, and then start gathering up the financial information that you're going to need. And like I said, you're going to have to find your bank records. You're going to have to find out if you have any retirement accounts. You need to find out, do you maybe have a stock portfolio or a savings account, something of that nature. You need to gather that information together. It's a really good idea to have copies of your tax returns so you know how much you each earn. If you earn a good living and you're able to sort of take care of the finances, even if he's left, you're in really good shape. But if you can't, then you might have to either ask him to help pay some of the bills, sort of in a, let's sit down and talk this through, which is really hard when he just served papers against you. Or you're going to end up getting a lawyer who's going to talk to his lawyer, and maybe the lawyers can between them say, well, listen, he'll pay the mortgage and she needs to pay the utilities, and kind of how that's all going to go. And then you're going to end up in court, and you're going to go to court, and the courts probably in most states are going to require you to come in with proof of your budget, sort of what your overhead is. Right now, I'm going to stop talking for a minute so that you can go and start to put together a list of what you have in terms of bank accounts, stock accounts. Do you own a house? Is there a mortgage on the house? Do you have a car? Do you each have a car? And then you've got to figure out what the value of your car is, and you can do that by going on Kelley Blue Book, which it'll say, if you have a 2005 Ford Taurus with X 10,000, 50,000 miles on it, tell you what your car's worth. So try to gather together that information of what you've got and what you think it's worth. You don't necessarily have to know exactly how much your house is worth, but having a ballpark idea. You can go on Zillow, which is an online service where they'll sort of give you a ballpark idea. These aren't the actual values you're going to use in your divorce, but it's a good idea to start accumulating a list of what you have, and then also you need to find out what debts you have. So before we turn this off, go through and figure out if you have credit cards, if you have a mortgage. You want to gather all that information, and we're going to do a session on how to put together your spreadsheet. But for now, let's just go through and figure out what all you've got, and as much as you can figure out, even though your life is turned upside down, it's pretty important to figure out what assets there are there. So let's stop for just a minute, and you can go through that and start working on your list.